There's no easy way to pinpoint the world's oldest city, but places like Jericho, with evidence of occupation dating back 11,000 years, often top the list. After millennia of human development, you'd think we'd have mastered the art of city living. But for all our advances, a lot of people remain trapped in cycles of poverty, conflict, hunger, and decay. Today, I'm looking at the darker side of human existence. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are the 25 worst places to live on Earth. 25. Beira, Mozambique. Beira has been battered by Mother Nature and left stumbling to recover. Cyclones like Idai in 2019 tore through the region, displacing thousands and wiping out essential infrastructure. It's been years, and the scars still remain, with many residents still stuck in temporary shelters. To this day, the city's drainage systems are overwhelmed, and rebuilding is dragged on forever. To make matters worse, Pedro is prone to severe flooding, making it feel like the city is constantly fighting a losing battle against the elements. Add to that widespread poverty and limited access to basic services, and it's no wonder life here feels like an endless fight for survival. 24. Dharavi, India. Today, by the most conservative estimates, about 900 million people live in slums all over the world. However, experts believe that number could actually be as high as 1.6 billion, which means a quarter of the world's urban population lives without access to proper housing, sanitation, or basic infrastructure. Dharavi in Mumbai is one of the biggest. Over 1 million people are packed into just 2.39 square kilometers, about 590 acres. Sanitation is dire, with open sewers, limited clean water, and no proper waste management. Disease outbreaks are a constant threat, and while some small industries operate here, they do little to offset the overwhelming poverty and horrendous living conditions. 23. Rocinha, Brazil. Rocinha, Rio de Janeiro's largest favela, is home to an estimated 150,000 to 300,000 residents, who all live in an area of just 0.8 square miles. Its stacked 10-story houses and narrow streets were famously featured in Fast 5, but life here is far from cinematic. Open sewers run between homes, causing frequent disease outbreaks, and only 2 health centers serve the entire population. The criminal underworld dominates, fueling violent conflicts with the police that claim hundreds of lives every year. While Rocinha has some infrastructure like concrete housing and running water, the constant threat of poverty, violence, and neglect gives it a solid spot on today's list. 22. Jakarta, Indonesia. Most of us know that Venice is slowly sinking, but some cities are facing an even more urgent crisis. Jakarta, a sprawling megacity of over 10 million, is sinking at a pace that's almost unimaginable. North Jakarta has dropped over 8 feet in the past decade, and some areas are sinking 11 inches every year. Nearly half the city is already below sea level, with severe flooding now a constant threat. The culprit is the over-extraction of groundwater, as the city's aging infrastructure fails to meet demand. With pollution choking waterways and infrastructure crumbling, Jakarta's future is so uncertain that Indonesia is relocating its capital entirely. 21. Makoko, Nigeria. Makoko, often called the Venice of Africa, is a floating slum on Lagos Lagoon, but the comparison to Venice, stops at the water. No official census has ever been done, perhaps because the government would rather pretend these people don't exist, but locals estimate that more than 250,000 people live here, crammed into a mix of stilt houses on the lagoon and makeshift homes on land. Without access to clean water, residents battle constant outbreaks of waterborne diseases like gastrointestinal infections and bacterial illnesses, and every day is a struggle to meet even the most basic sanitation needs. 20. Khayelitsha, South Africa. Khayelitsha, located on the outskirts of Cape Town, is one of South Africa's largest, not to mention deadliest townships. Its population of between 400 to 750,000 people live in extreme poverty, inadequate housing, and have limited access to basic services like clean water, electricity, and sanitation. Gang violence is a constant concern. In the 2022 reporting period, Khayelitsha's 3 police stations recorded 513 murders. That's an average of 1.4 per day. To put it into perspective, the settlement spans just 39.47 square kilometers, or 15.24 square miles, making it one of the most dangerous places to live in the world. 19. Zaatari Refugee Camp, Jordan. Zaatari Refugee Camp, opened in 2012, is now home to over 77,000 Syrian refugees. What started as a temporary haven has transformed into a semi-permanent city of metal shelters, makeshift businesses, and overcrowded schools. Life in the camp is anything but easy. More than half the population is minors, and many are forced into labor. 69% work to help support their families. Mental health issues are widespread, and it's made worse by limited access to medical care. Add in overcrowding, water shortages, and deprivation to the mix, and it's clear why Zaatari is a heartbreaking place to live. 18. Central African Republic, rural areas. The Central African Republic, or CAR, is a landlocked country in Central Africa, bordered by Chad, Sudan, South Sudan, Cameroon, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Despite its name, it's one of the continent's most underdeveloped nations, and life in CAR's rural area is particularly harsh. Extreme poverty and ongoing violence from armed groups make survival a daily battle. Rural villages are raided or burned on a frequent basis, and with little to no infrastructure, access to clean water or healthcare, education is basically non-existent. Farming, the main livelihood for many, is often disrupted by conflict, so apart from the violence, communities are vulnerable to hunger too. 17. Kibera, Kenya. Kibera, one of the largest and most notorious slums in the world, can be found on the outskirts of Nairobi. Homes are small mud or concrete huts with dirt floors, and the water supply is often contaminated, spreading diseases like typhoid and cholera. Toilet facilities are nothing more than shared pits, and are used by hundreds. Half of Kibera's population is unemployed. As such, many turn to glue sniffing or changa, a potent local brew, to escape their daily struggles. Women are often forced into sex work to survive, making AIDS and orphan children, sometimes born with the disease, one of the slum's defining features. 16. Delhi, India. For most of us, breathing clean air is something we take for granted. But for Delhi, that privilege evaporated decades ago, swallowed by the city's spiraling pollution crisis. India's capital is now swamped by smog, with air pollution killing an estimated 2 million Indians every year. In fact, in November 2024, the Air Quality Index reported readings over 1,700 in some areas, meaning the air is basically unbreathable. And unfortunately, pollution isn't the city's only challenge. Crime rates are rising, gender-based violence is a daily occurrence, poverty remains widespread, and many residents live in overcrowded areas without basic amenities. 15. Cité Soleil, Haiti. Can you imagine living in a place where gangs decide if you eat, where snipers kill indiscriminately, and where basic healthcare is non-existent? Well, that's the daily reality for hundreds of thousands of people in Cité Soleil on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince. In 2022, over 260 murders were reported in just 6 months in one neighborhood alone, alongside countless rapes, kidnappings, and violent attacks. Gangs block access to food, water, and medicine, forcing families to survive in unimaginable conditions. Cholera and other waterborne diseases spread easily in the filth, and the kind of life you and I consider normal is just a far-off dream. 14. San Pedro Sula, Honduras. San Pedro Sula was the murder capital of the world from 2011 to early 2016, and while the murder rate has dropped since those dark years, the city's problem with violence are far from over. According to the 2024 Crime Index, San Pedro Sula still scores an alarming 79.74, and much of the violence is linked to drug trafficking and gang activity, which overwhelms the city's police force. Corruption within law enforcement is also an ongoing problem, and most crimes go unresolved. That is, if they're even investigated at all. 13. Khartoum, Sudan. Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, has become a city of unthinkable suffering since the civil war erupted in April 2023. The violent conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces has claimed over 61,000 civilian lives and displaced over 11 million people. Essential services like electricity, clean water, and healthcare are virtually non-existent, and football stadiums have even been turned into graveyards due to the sheer number of deaths. Humanitarian aid is almost impossible to deliver, and ongoing mass killing, sexual violence, and famine conditions have made Khartoum one of the worst and most tragic places to live in the world today. 12. Juba, South Sudan. How much do you know about the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan? South Sudan became independent from Sudan on July 9, 2011, after decades of civil war and conflict. And while Khartoum is the epicenter of full-scale urban warfare, Juba faces a different but equally devastating struggle. South Sudan's capital is plagued by chronic poverty, political instability, and a crumbling economy. Civil servants have gone unpaid for nearly a year, and the government has resorted to taxing humanitarian aid, leaving millions in greater need. Nearly 2.32 million South Sudanese have fled to neighboring countries, and 2.22 million remain internally displaced, making theirs the largest refugee crisis in Africa and the third largest in the world. 11. Norilsk, Russia. Norilsk, tucked away deep in Siberia's Arctic wilderness, started as a Soviet gulag labor camp in the 1920s and later became a hub for nickel mining and smelting. Today, after decades of heavy industry, the city has been left with a grim legacy. Over 1.9 million tons of sulfur dioxide are pumped into the air every year, causing acid rain that's turned the surrounding 30 miles into a barren wasteland. Winters here are brutal, with temperatures plunging below negative 50 degrees Celsius. For residents, life is a constant battle against pollution, sky-high cancer rates, and a life expectancy well below the Russian average. 10. Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of the Congo. Home to nearly 15 million people, Kinshasa is one of Africa's largest cities and one of its most disorganized. Over half the population lives in poverty, with millions struggling to access basic services like clean water, electricity, or reliable sanitation. Traffic jams stretch for miles, and when the rains come, inadequate drainage systems flood entire neighborhoods, turning them into temporary lakes. Despite a $500 million World Bank initiative to improve urban infrastructure, Kinshasa's rapid growth has outpaced every effort to keep up. Nearly 75% of Congolese people live on less than $2.15 a day, leaving residents to navigate crumbling systems, constant congestion, and a never-ending fight just to meet their basic needs. 9. Dhaka, Bangladesh. Life in Dhaka is a daily battle against overcrowding. With over 5,000 slums across the city, yes, 5,000, more than 1.8 million people live in informal settlements where basic services like clean water, sanitation, and electricity are almost non-existent. Every day, roughly 2,000 new people arrive in the city, many fleeing rising sea levels and tropical storms in rural areas, only to find themselves crammed into already overcrowded slums. The air is choked with pollution, the streets clogged with waste, and the infrastructure just can't keep up. 8. Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. Cox's Bazar, home to over 1 million Rohingya refugees, is grappling with far more than just overcrowding and poverty. Disillusionment is running deep, with some refugees reportedly being drawn into Myanmar's ongoing civil war. It's estimated that between 3,000 to 5,000 people from the camps have joined insurgent groups, fueled by the unrelenting violence and extreme poverty around them. Each year, nearly 30,000 children are born into these desperate conditions, making them especially vulnerable. Experts have called the camp's growing instability a ticking time bomb, as weapons and militant activities steadily find their way into the area, adding yet another layer to an already overwhelming crisis. 7. Mogadishu, Somalia. Terrorism has no borders, no face, and no morality. That tells you all you need to know about its indiscriminate nature. The Somali government's total war against al-Shabaab, launched in 2022, has pushed the group out of some areas, but Mogadishu is still a frequent target. Bombings and attacks like the 2023 attack on the Pearl Beach Hotel that killed 9 people have the city in a constant state of alert. Add to that the crumbling infrastructure, poverty, and political instability, and something we all take for granted, like walking through the city, become risks most of us can't even begin to imagine. 6. Colima, Mexico. Colima used to be celebrated for its charm. Today, it holds the grim title of the world's most dangerous city, with a homicide rate of 140.32 per 100,000 residents. The city's descent into violence has been fueled by a turf war between Mexico's most dangerous drug cartels, including the Sinaloa cartel, Jalisco New Generation cartel, and Los Zetas. As it's near Manzanillo Point, a major hub for drug trafficking, Colima has turned into ground zero for smuggling chemicals. For the people still living there, fear has replaced normalcy. Crime and violence dominate every aspect of their lives, showing just how deeply organized crime can destabilize a region and upend everyday life. 5. Marib, Yemen. Yemen's civil war has engulfed Marib, which used to be a safe haven for those fleeing violence. The conflict began in 2014 when Houthi rebels took over large parts of the country, leading to a prolonged fight against the internationally recognized government. Today, its population has grown from a quiet 30,000 to hundreds of thousands, with over 2.2 million displaced people scattered across camps in the province. As Houthi forces close in, more families have been forced to flee, leaving many with nowhere to go. Airstrikes, landmines, and constant conflict have turned life into a nightmare, and millions of people are at risk of starvation as I speak. 4. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea, has a crime index score of 80.87. Violent assaults, armed robberies, and property crimes are part of the everyday reality here. But perhaps the most harrowing fact comes from a 2023 Human Rights Watch report, which calls Papua New Guinea, quote, one of the most dangerous places to be a woman or girl. Gender-based violence is shockingly common. Reports estimate that a woman is beaten every 30 seconds, and that's every 30 seconds, let that sink in, with over 1.5 million women and girls experiencing abuse every year. 3. Gaza Strip, Palestinian territories. After the October 2023 attacks, Israel launched a massive military operation in Gaza. I know people have strong opinions about this conflict, but I'm not here to debate who's right and who's wrong. What's clear is that innocent people are suffering. Today, the 1.9 million people living in the Gaza Strip find themselves trapped in a humanitarian crisis that grows worse by the day. Thousands have been displaced, and between late 2023 and 2024, over 42,000 Palestinians, including children, lost their lives. Hospitals are overwhelmed, food and clean water are almost non-existent, and almost the entire population has fallen into poverty. As the conflict continues, the cycle of destruction shows no signs of ending, and I can only imagine that the suffering will continue for years to come. 2. Aleppo, Syria. Once Syria's largest city and a thriving economic hub, Aleppo is back in the headlines, and back in the middle of a war zone. In November 2024, a new rebel coalition launched a surprise attack, taking control of large parts of the city for the first time since it fell to Assad's forces in 2016. The renewed fighting has reignited a war that's already taken over 300,000 lives and driven nearly 6 million people from their homes. Russian and Syrian airstrikes are once again battering rebel-held areas, further destroying a city that's already been devastated by years of warfare. 1. Damascus, Syria. While Aleppo is burning, Damascus, as Syria's capital, should be a symbol of stability. But instead, it's a city crushed by war, sanctions, and economic ruin. Access to essentials such as medical care, electricity, and clean water is nearly impossible, leaving millions of residents trapped in constant struggle and despair. What makes Damascus even more tragic is how many external forces have a hand in Syria's fate. Turkey eyes its influence, Iran clings to its strategic foothold, Israel seeks to undermine Iran's presence, and Russia and the US pursue their own agendas. For now, the world watches as Syria's capital becomes a battleground for competing interests. Unfortunately, that means the people of Damascus are caught in the middle, suffering the consequences of decisions made far beyond their control, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. That's it for me. The places on this list aren't just difficult to live in, they're a sobering reminder of how much work still needs to be done to ensure basic safety and dignity for everyone. And if you found this video thought-provoking, our new channel Dark Risk Detectives dives even deeper into the human stories behind some of the darkest corners of history and crime. It's not light, trust me, but it is fascinating. So check it out if you're ready for more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.